Okay, so we're going to pass the mic to someone who wants to ask about another song, and no one has said Ballad of a Thin Man, Ballad of a Thin Man. Oh, please,
Excellent,
would
good.
you, would
How
you
about
say
Ballad of a
why?
Thin Man?
Say why.
You know, I don't know the album in great detail, but I remember it being filled with allusions that I don't necessarily understand. A lot of biblical stuff, I think, right?
Yeah.
I find it, I
But
found it
not
in the...
Ballad of a Thin Man,
No?
particularly. No, I don't think so.
Oh, well...
Well, I mean, what's your take on, what do you remember from it, of that song?
I remember, so this is maybe a few years ago when I was really listening very consciously to the lyrics on the album. And this was one that kept ejecting me. You know, I was trying to make sense of it.
That's because you're Mr. Jones.
Is that right? Well,
Damn,
that seems like a good opening there.
3 kids, school teacher, you
This
read
is
all
true.
of F. Scott Fitzgerald.
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more. Strip me. Strip me naked.
No, I mean, well, I mean, you have an advanced degree.
I do.
Yeah. So you're very well read. It's well known.
Right?
I'm teasing you.
I know. I'm
but
enjoying it.
I'm Mr. Jones too most of the time, and I think a lot of people in this room are Mr. Jones. Yeah.
Mr. Jones is the sort of, the bourgeois object of this attack? What is it?
All right. Let's play a game. Each of us describe in adjectives or phrase length modifiers who Mr. Jones is. You first. Go. Just one.
Man.
I can start.
Sure,
You want?
go for
Okay. Academic. You go. You go.
Weak.
Superficial.
Self-confident.
Kind of journalistic in watching the counterculture. Got a pencil in his hand.
Yeah, hollow.
Hollow. A easy target for a man like Dylan who wants to hang out on the edge. A centrist.
Impotent.
Overthinker.
Man.
Literalist. Interpreter. Someone who likes to interpret things.
Yeah.
Someone who's constantly walking into a room and everybody thinks that somebody has left
A
the room.
prude. Sort of, I mean, really. Just
Square.
a
Square.
Square
Square.
and prudish. Afraid
Square.
of sex.
Square. Yet hits 1965, and Mr. Jones now has the sideburns are longer, and he's wearing not a Nehru jacket yet, but probably like a bright blue double-breasted suit. And he comes to all the press conferences, and he's thinking about writing an article for the New England Quarterly on trying to get New England Quarterly to move to the point where they would cover a folk rock guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Sort of a poser.
A poser. And that guy goes to the circus because Dylan is at the circus. So if you're covering Dylan, you got to go to the circus. I'm making this up. And he goes in and he gives his tickets in, and the geek comes up to him. What's a geek? Chickens and reptiles. A geek is a French circus performer who bites the heads off of chickens and reptiles. Another circus situation here in Dylan. Perfect, right? And the geek comes up to Mr. Jones and says, "How does it feel to be such a freak?" The geek says to Mr. Jones. And you say, Mr. Jones says, "Impossible," as the geek hands him a bone, presumably, the chicken, a little left from the chicken. And something is happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? Now, I would ask you, can we get him the mic again? Before I turn it over to Patrick.
Uh-oh.
What is it that Mr. Jones doesn't understand? This is so crucial, not just to the 60s, but to our time. What doesn't he understand in that scene?
Can we hear the actual lyrics there?
Do you want to listen?
You're deferring, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
I think the first stanza's-
let's do it, but I want to hear from the audience. Just shout it out. What do you think Mr. Jones doesn't understand? We should compile a list. He doesn't understand the way people really live. He does understand reality, that's the problem, right? But
reality as people who are living in Desolation Row with enlightened.
he doesn't understand that real reality. What else doesn't he understand?
The movement.
He doesn't understand Bob Dylan.
He doesn't understand Dylan, which
Example to me of his genre of hate song. Usually they're aimed at women who don't understand him, but in this case, it's Mr. Jones.
ouch, Bob. Ouch. I think there's something more going on. I get what you're saying. Look, when he You've been with professors, and they've all liked your looks. And with great lawyers, you've discussed lepers and crooks. You can imagine that conversation. You've been through all of F. Scott Fitzgerald's books. You're very well read. It's well known. But still, despite your education and despite your interest in modern life, Fitzgerald, dissipation and all, you don't get it at all. This is an anti-intellectual, and although he's the most intellectual, songwriter we have, or one of them, and this is anti-establishment, and it's anti-academic, and Fitzgerald's probably Mr. Jones probably got the BA from Princeton, I would say. So it's anti-Princeton. Now that's a pose for Dylan because he likes to be sitting at the edge, even though he's reading his Rimbaud and has memorized Mallarmé and hangs around with Ginsberg. But that's all anti or non-academic stuff. I think there's something really important for us sitting here in a university in the middle of the day to contemplate what Mr. Jones doesn't get and whether it's possible that what Mr. Jones doesn't get, we still don't get. So I'd push a little harder. So why don't we have Eric say what he wants to say, and then I'll throw it over to you. The mic's coming.
I guess I'm thinking Mr. Jones wants to have his cake and eat it too. He wants to hold on to, a big chunk of what he's already comfortable with, and just make enough space to include these interesting people on the edge. But the center cannot hold because the center does not have room to look out for what's really happening on the ground. So Mr. Jones is holding on too tight to something that's got to go if there's going to be room for everyone else.
Mr. Jones still believes in making sense.
I think there was one comment over here too, didn't you? No? Okay.
Do you want to comment and then play a little from the song?
Sure. So the one thing I would say just about finding a way in, because it took me until preparing for this this discussion to really find my way into this, which isn't, for me anyway, Dylan is not Mr. Jones. There's a part of Dylan in here. And the way into that for me was the line about you've read all F. Scott Fitzgerald's books. It's not just a sort of wink of I'm very well read too, and I know all this. The Great Gatsby is about a kid from the Midwest who goes to
Minnesota.
College in Minnesota. Right. He drops out of school. He moves to New York. He changes his name. He becomes fabulously famous, and yet he's still miserably unhappy and inaccessible. Dylan is not simply talking about an other here. He's wrapping himself up in all this. And that, for me, totally changed at least the ease with which you could say, well, Dylan is just saying F you to everybody. He's wrestling with something himself here, and he's trying to figure out where he stands in relationship to that. So I think he's Mr. Jones, too. And that, for me, was really helpful in trying to say, okay, I can find Dylan in this song, too, not just everyone he hates.
That's a very good reading. It might be a little Mr. Jones-ish, the reading. The reading, it's a self-referential reading. I think I buy it, but I still think that if it's about some version of him, the Secret Square, the American Dream guy, or the pretend guy, still the commitment to disconnection, disorientation, linguistic disjunction, and miscommunication that's in this song. One-eyed midget comes up to him and says, now. And you say, for what reason? And the midget says, how? And you say, what does this mean? And he screams back, you're a cow. Give me some milk or else go home. There's what we would call in the 1960s a failure to communicate there. And that this miscommunication, this devotion to miscommunication as a phenomenon in the turn of his career, may be a way of driving himself, of pushing himself forward toward alienation and away from the settled course. So in your Fitzgerald reading, which I think is compelling, he's the Mr. Jones until he breaks by asking Al Cooper to play spooky organ riffs, even though Al has never played the organ before. That's the Dylan who says, I don't want to do what I was doing, man. I want to try something new. I want to get off of this track. So
I think that's
I
exactly.
used to be
it.
Mr.
So-
Jones, and I'm not doing that anymore. Okay.
But you
Okay.
also have an artist who's wrestling with the creative process. So if Mr. Jones isn't the newspaper man who walks into the room and hears Dylan say all sorts of crazy stuff, and he isn't sort of a weirdly sexualized figure who walks into a room with a pencil in his hand, but if he's Dylan who comes into that space where he writes, where he's a songwriter, and he's got his pencil in his hand and he says, wait, who's that? Then he's somebody who's trying to wrestle with this idea of, I'm a person and I have an identity and I have loyalties and I feel all these, corporeal, boring, lame feelings. But when I write, I'm trying to get somewhere else and I don't even understand where I'm trying to get. So I mean, I think your point about sort of challenging himself and trying to push what he's doing further is true, but he's also admitting a certain limitation that he feels in being able to do that all the time as easily as it looks when he actually presses the album.
I still want to push back. I still want to push for a social, national political reading of this song. As much as I get that personal stuff, and as a Dylanologist, I'm really interested in all the ins and outs of his own situation. So, Queen Jane may be Joan Baez, and I'm interested in that. But here, something is happening. This is a phrase that will continue to be used by music, by popular music, from 65 till about 73. There's something happening here.
What it is,
And
ain't exactly.
what it is ain't exactly clear, which is basically a quotation from Ballad of a Thin Man. There's a man with a gun over there. I don't even know where I am. And I got a BA from Princeton, and I read Fitzgerald, and I got A's, and I got a job, and I can write clearly, and still I don't understand what's going on. And Dylan is saying, the country could be in the hands of people who claim they know what's going on when they don't. So I'm worried about that, he's saying. I'm worried about a country that is in the hands of people who are confident enough to think that language still works, that when they say something, they mean it, that they aren't simply lying. And I think Ballad of a Thin Man is a rallying cry to make sure we understand who the Mr. Joneses are out there, and to expose them to the geeks and the other circus performers and the weirdos and the surrealists and the marginalized
The
people.
man in high heels.
The man in high heels. And there's a lot of gender bending here, and more so anywhere else in his albums so far. He wants to mix things up so that the Mr. Joneses are confronted by a change of identity in America and admit, I'm lost. I don't get it anymore. Something is happening, and I really should try to understand it. You want to play a little bit?
First stanza.
Yep. Can we just stipulate that songs like that were not being written at this time?
He also, it's one of the songs he plays most often still, and it's awesome. Where a lot of the other songs that I think he plays in concert today, you're like, oh my God, I can barely even hear the song I love somewhere buried inside that. When he plays this, it's
gets it.
electric, it's loud, it's abrasive, but in those ways where I think you feel the song. And I don't really think about Dylan's body language very much as a rock star, but when he plays this song, it's always out like this. I mean, he is just telegraphing to the audience some kind of intensity that I think is really striking. Every
But I
time I've
have
seen
to
him
say,
perform it.
the worst bridge in all of Dylan.
But his first bridge, right?
It's his first bridge and his worst, and it's just a throwaway, and it has somehow he uses the phrase tax-deductible charity organization, which is a great feat, but the bridge itself he's not behind that bridge, I can tell.